Today's topic is proofreading. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you improve your proofreading skills. If you're a writer, it doesn't matter what you're writing, at some point you're going to have to proofread your work. You can never send your work out to anyone, not an editor, not an agent, not a beta reader, and certainly not to your readers, if the work hasn't been proofread. At the end of the process, even if you hire a professional proofreader to look at your work, you're still going to have to proof your work at some point along the way. Before I get to my 5 tips for you to improve your proofing skills, I want to differentiate between copy editing and proofreading. Now, you'll know at this stage that there are various levels of editing that have to be done to your work once you're finished writing. There's a substantive development edit first. That edit looks at the overall project, it looks at the overall concept, it looks at the way it all comes together. And if we're talking about a lengthy project like a book, then that process can be quite substantial and it can go on for quite a period of time. Once the developmental edit is done and the drafts have been redone a number of times, then you'll go into the copy edit period. That copy edit means that the sentence structure is going to be looked at, the structure of each paragraph, it's going to be looked at very, very carefully. But that's the second last step before proofreading. And so what we're talking today is that final line by line proofreading that needs to be done before your manuscript sees the light of day. Just so you know the definition of proofreading, here it is. It's a line-by-line examination of the manuscript to fix all those final typos before a manuscript goes anywhere. So today I have 5 tips to help you to improve your proofing. Tip number 1, set the manuscript aside for a week or 2 weeks before you begin proofreading it. You're at this final stage and you have written this book and you've written it over and over again, or it's a magazine piece or even a blog piece. You've looked at it so many times that you're not going to see those errors unless you set it aside a little. So set it aside and come back to it in a week or 2 with fresh eyes. Tip number 2, and I can't stress this enough, is don't rely on your spell checker. Obviously, you're going to use your spell checker on your computer as you move through the process, but don't rely on it. There are lots of errors it won't pick up. Things like the difference between the word there, T-H-E-R-E, and T-H-E-I-R, it's not going to pick that up. It will probably miss things like a single O when you meant of, or an O instead of an A, or A when you meant an. It's not going to pick up those little things, and it sometimes misses things that should have been picked up by a spell checker. So don't rely on your spell checker. Tip number 3, consider printing out a hard copy of your work. Now, I know this is anathema to some people. They want to keep everything digital. But I think for me personally as a writer, I have found this very helpful. I always print out a copy of my work as I go along. I won't print every draft of a book that I'm writing, but I will always print a first draft and a last. This is very helpful because your font is going to look a little different and you're going to see those final errors a little differently. It also allows you to do one other thing, which is probably could be a separate tip, but it's one that I don't do personally, but some people find it very helpful. It's to use your finger to run along each line and read it almost letter by letter. And that's much easier to do when you're using a hard copy than it is to do when you're using a computer screen. Tip number 4 is read your manuscript out loud. Now, this is important at various stages in the process, but during proofreading, it can actually help your eyes to see errors that you might have missed previously. Tip number 5, keep a running list of the mistakes you make most frequently. Now, the way that I would suggest you do this is get yourself one of those tiny little notebooks. I really love those moleskin notebooks. Keep it with you all the time when you're writing and make a list of those errors as you go through every project that you go through and you see what your own personal errors are. Sometimes it's a typing thing, sometimes it is an error in usage of a word. Keep that list. Use it to look for those specific things when you do your final proofing. And as you're doing your final proofing, every time you find another kind of an error, write it in that little notebook. I highly recommend you keep that notebook specifically for tracking your errors. Okay, those are my 5 tips for today. There are others. Other people do other kinds of things, like I've seen suggestions about proofing by reading your manuscript backwards. I haven't really figured out how that works. I don't know how to do it, but if you have an occasion to do that and it works for you, fantastic. Let me know. Maybe I'll be able to try it sometime and add it to my list of tips. Well, I've got a manuscript to get back to. You probably do too. Talk to you soon. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat, and maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.